Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Kemp. I'm one of the founders of Emperor, and for me personally, it's been quite a big month. Having set the business up 26 years, I stepped off this month as being CEO. Got two wonderful new co-CEOs now, and very excited about my future role. It's going to be very much around more client counsel, looking at how we can sort of leverage off our fantastic network, and also the international opportunity for Emperor now, with the world getting ever flatter. And I have to answer the question pretty much daily because it's still asked. I am not retiring. I am delighted to be joined by three colleagues. First of all, Sam Trillwood, who's been at Emperor for 5 years, having cut her teeth originally in financial PR. Sam is as active on the business as she is in it, and is a valuable and very proactive member of our employee board. And then we also have Baptiste, or Bap as he is known, one of Emperor's rising stars. He graduated from Warwick Business School last year, where he was highly recommended by one of the professors, and it's proving to be a great recommendation. And finally, Milligan. Leon joined Emperor on the 2nd of February 1998, so is now in his 25th year. In that time, he's been immersed in the ever-changing, ever-evolving reporting and disclosure landscape, and had many different roles within Emperor, now one of our senior consultants. So a few housekeeping points. The event is being recorded, but participants won't appear in the recording. All materials will be made available following the event. And if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them either during or after the session. So it's an incredibly interesting time in the whole world of reporting, disclosure and engagement. Change is everywhere right now, from increasing stakeholder expectations around climate action, social issues and equality, new policies and regulation on technology and low carbon economies, the growing threat of international war, supply chain shortages and rising inflation. And many businesses coming out of the pandemic want to be materially different to going in it, in terms of their societal commitments and how they go about their business. And no brand or sector is immune to this change. And as the world changes, so must businesses and the way that they communicate with their stakeholders. Sustainability commitments are now an expectation, not a differentiator. And this is reflected in the rapid developments to create global sustainability standards that put financial and sustainability disclosure on an equal footing. And this has huge implications for the future of corporate reporting. These business challenges and changing stakeholder expectations have all been considered in shaping our latest research. And I'm now going to hand over to Leon, who will introduce this research and also go through our methodology too.
Thanks, Steve. So each year in early spring, we review the reporting by the FTSE 350 from the previous calendar year. We do this to understand the direction reporting is taking and to share our findings with you. This year, we set out with no fixed agenda to allow the review process itself to shape the theme of our findings. As you know, there have been pockets of new regulation, such as TCFD and ESEF, which are interesting in their own way. But more than new compliance considerations, we have found the presentation of value creation narrative to be the most interesting feature of this year's reporting. By value creation narrative, we mean the evidence of progress from the perspective of stakeholder capitalism, i.e. looking deeper than short-term profit to focus on the longer-term drivers of business success. It's clear from our research that more and more companies are truly understanding that creating value for all stakeholders is the route to their long-term success, and that this should be the basis of their corporate narrative. We saw a wide variety of successful and authentic approaches this year, and so the objective of this review is to share a broad set of examples of value creation narrative from across the reporting suites of selected companies. There are many other great examples out there, so this is far from an exhaustive list, but we think the range of examples we will discuss and demonstrate today are some of the more interesting and replicable approaches to value creation narrative. So how did we select the companies to discuss with you today? Initially, we conducted a RAG scan assessment of the annual reports of the entire 350, which drew out 100 annual reports for us to take a deeper look at. We then narrowed down from 100 annual reports to select 40 companies to review their entire reporting suite, encompassing their sustainability reporting, websites, presentations, videos, and any other additional reporting publications. From this review of 40 reporting suites, specific themes, ideas, and points of interest in relation to value creation became apparent. We then selected 20 companies to demonstrate these points in today's presentation. The value creation themes, ideas, and specific points of interest that were drawn out through the review process can be expressed by the following framework. Under the heading of strategy, I will take a look at the interesting ways in which companies have summarized their business story, how they have approached their business model, presented key messages, and the different ways they articulate their corporate strategy through an operational, integrated, or stakeholder lens.
I'll be taking a look at environmental and social impact as part of the value creation narrative, and within that I'm going to look at materiality, evidence-based disclosures, and also how companies are beginning to address TCFD.
And under the heading of governance, I'll take a look at decisions, actions and outcomes, diversity and culture, code compliance, and efficient at-a-glance content.
In terms of communication principles, in each of the above sections, we have considered how clarity and consistency have been applied and how companies have focused on evidence and decision useful information. And in terms of the disclosure network, in each section, we have looked at how channels beyond the annual reports and sustainability reports, such as the website, video, and additional publications, have been used to consistently deliver the value creation narrative. So starting with strategy. The first example that I wanted to take you through was Great Portland Estates. We're seeing more and more companies developing interesting and informative narrative-led preambles to their reporting. And we think this trend for more bite-sized positioning and performance content up front in reports works particularly well for those who are time poor and those viewing on screen, which is the majority these days. GPE is a good example of this approach, which promotes highlights, performance, culture, stakeholders, and the wider portfolio. And there's Landsec too, with its responding to the present, planning for the future section, which covers similar points, again draws in a leadership statement, albeit in a different way, and also digs deeper into ESG. We find most companies these days are now profiling sustainability or ESG at the top level of their communications. Moving to business models. Companies are no longer sticking to the two-page spread to address their business model. The Standard Chartered example includes what we would expect to see in a business model, what they do, how they make their money, what makes them different, the resources they employ, and the value they create. But unlike many, they provide enough detail to make each section meaningful. Legal & General's business model goes a bit deeper, and it comprehensively covers resources, what we do and purpose, and how we create value for stakeholders. We think this is fast becoming the standard for business models in future. To avoid duplication, we're also seeing some companies roll the traditional at-a-glance overview sections and the newer stakeholder summary sections all under the banner of business model. And in some cases, the storytelling or key message sections of the report are also coming under the business model too. Admiral's business model is one such example. initially presenting an overview of the business segments, and then they focus on the key drivers of success in highly visual spreads. And then again, they end on a value creation for stakeholders section. We think it's worth noting that the focus is on how stakeholders have benefited and the priorities ahead, rather than how the company has engaged with the stakeholders. Here, in their own words, I will explain why they liked the approach that they took. Moving to key messages, we have identified a number of companies that have done a great job in delivering their key strategic messages. Legal & General have developed a particularly strong articulation of their social purpose, inclusive capital. It's clearly at the centre of all of their strategic thinking, and it drives their key message pages on climate and on digital transformation. Inclusive capitalism is conceptually brilliant and beautifully presented in the annual report. But they go even further on the website. Here it has its own section in the primary navigation, and it's distinct from their sustainability section. It contains lots of rich information which really brings their purpose to life and has a consistent look and feel with the annual report. We think this is a really smart approach and something that more companies could be thinking about. Where Legal & General had a feature section on their website for their purpose, Anglo-American explore a specific strategic issue in detail on their website. Future Smart Mining is a subset of their innovation strategic pillar, and it features in the annual report, but really it's best promoted digitally. Here it's included again in the primary navigation of the website, with the 4 concepts of new mining explained in layman's terms and brought to life through a video. They also use social media to promote their approach to future smart mining. Having a dedicated section to your website utilizing social media are great ways to get your messages across to a wider audience. Vodafone also does a great job in getting its value creation messages across online through a dedicated video hub. There's an intro video that explains the purpose and brand positioning, a summary of the results from the CEO and CFO, and a selection of Q&As from other board members. Vodafone have a rather vanilla looking annual report, so these videos demonstrate that they consider digital communication much more strongly. Bridging the gap between key messages and the strategy, we thought we'd show you Reckitt. Reckitt's strategy consists of growth drivers delivered by divisions and centralised strategic imperatives. A key development in Reckitt's messaging was to demonstrate the role the divisions play in delivering the strategy. So they've done away with the divisional operating reviews, and now the divisional strategic progress is part of the core strategy section, with the divisional performance elements being rolled into a financial review. Progress against the group-wide strategic imperatives then follows these divisional progress sections. Then, supporting the strategy section, Reckitt created a set of detailed thematic features addressing innovation, digital, supply chain, and culture. And collectively, these present the key components of value creation for the company. Now moving to how companies specifically present their strategy and the progress against it. We'll look at a few different approaches that work well, starting with operational focus. Landsec presented a new strategy this year with 4 priorities, one for each of their new operating segments. Optimise related to central London, reimagine, regional retail, grow, urban opportunities, realise subscale sectors. Each strategic priority has a bold, highly visual section dedicated to explaining what the priority means in practice and how it is aligned to their purpose. There's also a fantastic summary which explains the background to the strategy, including the performance drivers that support the strategy and how risk is considered. It's in this framework that ESG leadership is embedded, and it's through this framework that it demonstrates how ESG is one of the key drivers of performance. Now moving to how companies specifically present their strategy. Now looking at strategies with integrated focus. So first presented in their 2019 annual report, Coca-Cola HBC strategy remains an excellent example of truly integrated thinking, where ESG is reflected in the main strategy. They do this by focusing their growth pillars on customer-centric competitiveness, people, and social license to operate. And they start with a tabular summary. Then each growth pillar has its own overview section, which highlights with past highlights and priorities ahead. They then identify how KPIs and stakeholders and risks are all linked. And each section is then followed by a detailed narrative section that really demonstrates how the company is creating value. There's also an interesting and meaningful case study per growth pillar. With progress against this integrated strategy discussed in detail, there's no need for an additional operational or sustainability section. This strategy section really is the main body of the report. Then there are companies that present their strategy with a focus on stakeholders. And within this set, there are a range of approaches. Unilever have an integrated strategy along the same lines as Coca-Cola. Their strategy identifies a broad set of strategic choices. But rather than report against each of these directly, they instead report by stakeholder groups. And then a financial review at the end. And then collectively, this enables them to focus on the value created for each stakeholder by each of the different strategic choices that they have made. Barclays are another to have updated the presentation of their strategy this year, increasing their focus on the low carbon economy. But their reporting structure retains its stakeholder focus as they continue to focus on outcomes for stakeholders. Essentially, the customer and client section is their divisional operating review. Colleagues section addresses all the people matters, and society addresses wider sustainability, with investors addressing the finances. They also retain the alignment of KPIs to the stakeholder groups. And finally, in this section, there's 7 Trent strategy, which concentrates firmly on a set of 9 customer and community outcomes. They provide a detailed review of progress against each of these intended outcomes in a performance report. And then they clearly link their KPIs to these outcomes. It's interesting to see a strategic narrative wholly focused on customers and communities. In all this talk about stakeholders in reporting, I sometimes wonder if the customer gets due consideration. So to quickly summarize what I've taken you through, we've looked at how companies are developing a short form narrative at the beginning of their reports, which makes sense given the ever increasing size of these reports. We've looked at how business models are being developed to become more meaningful, and how key reporting messages are being presented in the annual report and across other media to drive those messages home. And finally, how there can be multiple ways to successfully articulate a corporate strategy that is designed to create long-term stakeholder value. So now I'll hand over to Sam to take you through environmental and social impact reporting.
Thanks, Leon. So yes, environmental and social impact reporting. What we wanted to look at here were both the external impact, so how companies were communicating the impact that they have on the environment and society, but also looking at that internal impact, so how are environmental and social issues impacting the business. And as we know, that's an area that's going to become increasingly regulated. We have TCFD, and then coming up the formation of the ISSB and CSRD in Europe. So there's the regulatory side of things, but actually best practice is going to continue to go beyond that. So there's a really wide range of stakeholders that are interested in environmental and social impact reporting, as they're looking at companies to demonstrate a positive impact on the world around them. So that was very much our starting point. And what I wanted to look at first was an example from Coca-Cola around the concept of materiality. So a materiality assessment is a really key starting point in shaping a robust approach to sustainability. It helps companies understand those ESG risks and opportunities that are most pertinent to the business, and ultimately should go on to inform a company's strategy, and then therefore the information that they're disclosing to investors and wider stakeholders. So looking at Coca-Cola, they conduct a materiality assessment regularly, review it to ensure it's up to date. But what they also publish online, which was quite interesting, is this life cycle analysis. So here they're looking at the business operations and trying to understand the environmental impact that they have across the different aspects of the business. So a really neat way of summarising the environmental impact within their operations, but also provides insight upstream and downstream of the value chain. Looking at how that analysis and materiality informs what Coca-Cola does and reports. So Leon talked about their strategy earlier. Those material issues very much inform the strategy and also their long-term sustainability commitments, which are on the right-hand side here. I think the final point to make in this example is just also looking at how they use the SDGs. So the material issues and commitments align to the SDGs, but not just the 17 overarching goals. They go one step further to look at the specific targets that sit underneath those goals. So really showing how the company can have a positive environmental and social impact and contribute to the delivery of those global goals. Another company that uses a materiality assessment is Mondi, and they used the concept of double materiality. So where you're looking at both the impact of environmental and social issues on the business, the financial impact, the impact on enterprise value, but also the impact that the business has on the environment and society. So they use that concept of double materiality to update their sustainability framework, MAP 2030. And you can see here this spread from the annual report. They focus on 3 priority areas around their products, people, and the planet. And each of those has a really clear set of commitments and targets associated with it. And they use this traffic light system to report whether they're on track or behind achieving that target. They then produce, as well as the annual report, they have a sustainable development report, and they also use the website to really evidence what they're doing and how they're delivering on their strategy, achieving their targets and commitments. So as I click through, you can see in the sustainability report, they've got highlights. They also acknowledge external recognition that they've received from indices and corporate ratings. They highlight award-winning innovation across the product range of products that they produce, and also include testimonials from customers. So here there's a quote from Tesco. What we also really like from Mondi, which is slightly different, is a set of discovery cards they have online. So here very much thinking about those wider stakeholders, more of an educational tool for people to really understand more about Mondi's environmental impact and how its products and operations fit within the circular economy. So I think key takeaway from Mondi is really that it's the evidence that gives credibility to the disclosure that they're putting out. And then more broadly outside, thinking about all companies, it's not just focusing on evidencing the positive impact that a company is having, it's also evidencing how you're responding to mitigate any potential negative impact that your operations may have on the environment or society. Just continuing with Mondi as we start to look at TCFD. So another aspect of their MAP 2030 framework is all around taking action on climate. And TCFD is, of course, becoming mandatory for main market companies. And so we're looking at companies to going beyond discussing the impact they have on the environment, but now looking internally. So what's the financial impact of climate change on the business? And I think at this stage from our research, looking at all companies' disclosure, many are still in the early stages of implementing TCFD. And quite often, therefore, in the disclosure, the elements that are lacking are the more in-depth scenario analysis, and then really key, actually quantifying the financial impact of climate change on the business. But having said that, with Mondi, they're very much an early reporter with TCFD. As you can see here, they note that emissions reductions have been on the agenda for nearly 2 decades. And then they have this really neat timeline that summarises the journey they've been on to take action on climate. And as you can see here, in 2018, they started voluntarily disclosing in line with TCFD recommendations. So it's something they've been looking at for a good few years. Their disclosures are really comprehensive, so detail around the risks and opportunities associated with climate change for the business. And as you can see down the right-hand column, it's this estimated financial impact that's really important against each of the risks, but also the opportunities. So considering both the upside and the downside. And then I really like this summary sort of table graphic that they had, which just provides a quite neat visual of financial impact, the time frame, and then the likelihood, looking at scenario sensitivity. And then the last bit to highlight in terms of their disclosure and sort of going back to that evidence piece is examples of actions they're taking. So here they're highlighting decarbonisation initiatives and not just describing what those are, but actually quantifying the investment that they're putting into those initiatives at this stage. So I think key takeaway from this example is that at this stage, few are as comprehensive as Mondi. What's really important is that scenario analysis and financial impact. And just in terms of another company that I haven't included an example of here, but Unilever is another one that looks at that financial disclosure in a bit more detail. So people are taking a look at that one. What we wanted to do next, looking beyond content to the disclosure network, is how companies are using the website. And AstraZeneca was a great example. So as you can see from the homepage, they go straight to a sustainability section. You can explore the different pillars of the strategy and progress they're making against those pillars. And then there's a more detailed sustainability resources hub where you can access the sustainability report. It goes through to a more detailed hub. And here, as you can see, there's a data summary. And then for each year, there's a series of other supporting documents, TCFD case studies, a SASB index, that data summary. So a real wealth of information around their sustainability strategy. They also go one step further within the actual investor section of the website. So very much thinking about investors and analysts and the type of information they want. There's this interactive reporting center, and it goes through each pillar of that sustainability strategy. You can click through, you can look at the metrics that sit under each pillar of the strategy, really interrogate the numbers. You can download that data as an Excel sheet, a PDF, and there's also interactive charting. So you can look at different timeframes and download images of those graphs. So I think the key takeaway here with AstraZeneca is that the website's really catering for those diverse audiences that are looking to understand a company's sustainability approach and the impact that they're having on the environment and society, with sort of stories, highlights, and then also the more technical data for analysts and investors. The final point on this, just to close the loop and think about what Leon was saying in terms of strategy disclosure, AstraZeneca take a very similar approach to Coca-Cola, so an integrated annual report, and within that, sustainability is discussed within a wider business review, so very much alongside the corporate strategic disclosure. And then clearly it's the website where they really bring that story to life outside of an integrated report. As I mentioned, there's also a wealth of different documents and reports that companies are putting out. So, of course, there's requirements for various bits and pieces to sit within the annual report, like your emissions data. But actually, companies are looking to a wider range of documents now, not just a sustainability report, but other summary documents and topic-specific documents. So with Landsec, as an example, within the annual report, they have this social review and an accompanying environmental review, quite succinct, linking to other documents. And so to support that, there's a 2-pager sustainability update, which is really nice, supported by the more technical factual data report. And then 2 other documents that are more story-led, I suppose, so economic contribution and social contribution. And then the last document is this net zero carbon pathway report. But going back to that point around the website, obviously that's really the central hub for stakeholders to access all of these different documents and bring the story to life. So Landsec do also have a really rich suite of content on the website, as you can see here. So they recently launched a new sustainability strategy with 3 pillars, and they use a lot of video and sort of interactive assets and graphics to bring that sustainability strategy to life. So as you scroll down, there's a bit more info on that strategy and their sustainability vision, and then this visual articulation of the sustainability framework where you can click through and see what the focus areas are under each of those priorities. And I think the last thing to flag in this example that we really liked was this video that sits alongside it. So this has employees from all over Landsec talking about the sustainability strategy and the vision for the business. And I think specifically for the employee audience, this is a really nice way for them to be able to relate to the strategy, understand what it means to their role and their day-to-day activities at the business, and how they can be practically contributing to the delivery of the sustainability strategy as part of their roles. So that was a really nice example. Again, a very different approach here with Intertech. They very much, as you can see here, look at strategic, sustainability and financial performance as a collective. And the majority of their sustainability disclosure as a result sits within the integrated annual report. So they break it down into the strategic report, the sustainability report, and then the financial report, so the back end with the financial statements. What's really interesting is that the governance piece sits within that sustainability report. So they're capturing E, S, and G all in one place. And that's not just the governance of the environmental and social aspects, that's governance more broadly. So reporting against the code, covering off REM, audit and risk, everything sits within that sustainability section of the annual report. And again, just a quote here from Intertech explaining why they decided to take that approach to their annual report this year. Just 2 more examples from me. Firstly, spotlighting digital sustainability reports in particular. So quite often when we think about producing a sustainability report, in the past, the default has been a printed or a PDF document, but same way with annual reports, we're moving away from that. And Severn Trent has a really nice digital sustainability report online. So you can still download a PDF if you want to, but then thinking about catering for those different audiences, it's animated, it's interactive, users can really interrogate the information they're most interested in. It links off to other sections of the website. So a really nice interactive digital report that's a much more focused, I suppose, on usability, user experience, interactivity, accessibility, rather than just sort of the detailed content as a PDF. And then final example here. So our focus today very much on progressive disclosure, but actually for environmental and social impact and sustainability, the communications doesn't end with that disclosure piece. So there's very much also an engagement part in order for companies to be activating and embedding those sustainability strategies. And we found that Unilever was a really nice example of this. So they use the website and social media to engage those different audiences, to educate them in terms of taking action, changing behaviours. So waste-free world, as an example, is a focus area of their strategy. Assets and videos on social media. So this is one of their Instagram posts. And then across the website, there's opportunities for users to engage with the sustainability strategy, and a variety of calls to actions are sort of embedded throughout their disclosure. So you can see how Unilever is very much educating those stakeholders, outlining not just the actions the business has taken in terms of delivering on its strategy and managing its environmental and social impact, but actually consumers can take the issues that they care about most and think about how they can have a positive impact on the planet and society. So A couple of key takeaways from this section very quickly. I think firstly, as we saw with the likes of Mondi, when we're focusing on environmental and social impact in the context of this value creation narrative, having clear and meaningful metrics and targets, and also the evidence-based disclosure is really key in demonstrating a company's credibility in terms of sustainable, responsible business performance. Secondly, the point around understanding your audiences. So the stakeholders that are interested in this type of information are broader than ever before, and you really need to understand your audiences to make sure you're using the right language, the right narrative, the right media to fulfill their needs and engage with them successfully. And then going back to the website point again, which I've mentioned a few times, it's got a really critical central role to play, and you should almost see it as a bit of a gateway for reaching those broader audiences when you're thinking about your sustainability communications. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to hand over to Bap now, who's going to look at governance in a bit more detail.
So moving on from environment and social, we also really wanted to see innovative yet transparent approaches to governance reporting. And what we mean by that is efficient explanations of internal processes and structures, but it also all needs to be evidenced by clear examples that showcase their impact on stakeholder value. We noted a more robust and transparent approach to governance disclosures that efficiently highlights key board activities, actions, and the decision-making process behind them, but also an essential focus on outcomes, demonstrating the effectiveness the board and governance structures have in creating long-term value. Decision-making is a strong theme within SSC's governance reporting, for example. They explain how their purpose, vision, strategy, culture, and stakeholders all impact their decisions in an upfront sections. But what we really love is that they illustrate this by including feature sections for each principal decision of the year, in which they detail information about the decision background, what the board's discussion specifically entailed, how different stakeholders were considered and how this specific decision impacts them, and the outcomes of the decision and step that followed relating to it. On top of that, it provides a clear link to their corporate strategy and key principal risks, including climate change considerations. In this way, they really provide the reader with good insight into their decision-making process, with clear examples evidencing the outcomes of said decisions and benefits for different stakeholder groups. And here's just a short quote from SSC on why this approach is really, really important to them. Now, ITV similarly based their entire governance report around actions, ensuring each section is focused on outcomes rather than simply describing processes. This can be seen throughout the report, but it is especially strong within their stakeholder engagement section. It's worth noting that this is an area that is really gaining traction, as integrating stakeholders' issues into board decision-making is really becoming best practice around the board. This stakeholder engagement section really effectively builds around the S172 statement and then provides detailed information on the forms of engagement put into place for all their different stakeholders. But the reason we highlight this example is because it mainly focuses on the issues identified from this engagement and the impact that followed on the board's principal decisions. Their Audit and Risk Committee report equally focuses on actions and outcomes, but based on considerations of key risks that were identified during the year. Overall, what we really want to highlight from this example is a more transparent approach to governance reporting focused on decisions, actions, and outcomes is really an approach that we've seen gain momentum, and companies are taking different approaches to it. Some are taking a much more straightforward and minimal approach to this through thorough key activity spreads, for example. 7 Trend manages to pack a lot of information within a key activities table, which includes precise actions of the year and different stakeholders considered for each of their strategic areas. Building on this, we wanted to highlight the growing consideration of internal stakeholders in in governance processes. Indeed, this is a trend we observed throughout all the best governance reporters, as thorough governance reporting also needs to take into account the people integral to a business's success and how diversity and culture within the board and wider workforce is managed. Focus on the value you bring to your people and the value they bring to you. We saw more and more sections specifically focusing on culture. This example by ITV is prefaced by a Q&A with their designated workforce engagement director, in which he discusses key workforce engagement related activities, issues, and aspirations for the future. This really evidences ITV's focus on their wider workforce, which is further emphasized by monitoring culture section, which reiterates ITV's values and includes details around key culture related highlights, as well as systems and policies put into motion to engage with the workforce efficiently. Taylor Wimpey also offered an overview of how they approach culture, relying on a more simple description of their process and key actions taken in the year. But their consideration of internal stakeholders is also demonstrated as they provide detail around their diversity policy. They offer a look into their progress against clear diversity targets and aspirations for the year to come. Quality reporting around diversity and governance reports has struggled to be up to standards according to the FRC, but examples like this one really show how diversity-related communications can be integrated within governance content in a really simple manner to highlight it as the board priority that it really should be. This is something that Seven Trends also does, really efficiently integrating their diversity-related process. They offer detailed disclosure on more specific diversity objectives at board level and how they're being implemented and their current progress, but they also offer future-focused insights by disclosing aspirations for the next year, much like we saw in the previous example by Taylor Wimpey. This shift towards more thorough diversity-related disclosures is in line with stakeholder expectations, but also compliant with what is regarded as best practice by UK regulators. And while we really previously mentioned that this presentation wouldn't be about compliance, we thought it would be important to mention that the best reporters use compliance with UK regulations as an opportunity to display their commitment to good governance practices and as a way of evidencing the validity of their value creation narrative. For example, companies are increasingly structuring their corporate governance report around the UK governance code, and in this example from United Utilities, they match the structure of their report with its 5 sections. The board leadership and company purpose, division of responsibilities, composition, succession, and evaluation, audit, risk and internal control, and remuneration. For each section, they really provide a compliance statement, clearly responding to each principle set forward by the code, before delving into more in-depth content that will further demonstrate how their processes create internal and external value. Another approach to this code compliance companies are taking is the inclusion of an upfront compliance statement ahead of the committee reports. This is a format that British Land uses, and it really allows them to keep a more personal narrative structure in their report while still being in line with UK reporting requirements. This way, they were able to more efficiently structure their report around an applied governance narrative, focusing on providing examples of key actions around their different focus areas. Now, Sam previously mentioned an increasing amount of stakeholders interested in environmental and social content, and it's no different for governance-related topics. From consumers and employees to retail investors, we've noted more efforts from companies to make their content more engaging and accessible to these new audiences. One approach we really liked was the one of governance at a glance spreads. Through highly visual content, a good at-a-glance spread can offer insight into a company's key governance information without getting lost in overcomplicated content. This example by Seven Trends provides highlights for the year and a description of the board composition, but also major decisions for the year, details around the expertise of the board, and it also highlights improvements of recent governance policies. all in an easily digestible format and referencing other parts of the report where interested audiences can access further information. This is an approach that Vodafone also takes, but they really take a cross-channel approach to this, linking it to further video content present on their corporate website through QR codes, with different members of the board telling their stories and approach. In doing so, Vodafone not only provides its audience with more engaging type of content, they also guide them from the governance report to the wider communications network that Leon previously mentioned, in which further and perhaps more relevant disclosures can be found depending on the audience. In summary, the key points we really wanted to highlight here are that we've observed a real progress in governance reporting approaches, with companies highlighting how key risks and different stakeholders are considered in their decision-making processes and the outcomes of said considerations through real-life examples. On top of that, we see a focus on internal stakeholders through thorough culture sections and the implementation of measurable diversity targets, which highlights this value creation narrative for both internal and external stakeholders. But we also wanted to highlight that the best reporters managed to balance innovation with compliance and offered accessible content that uses their wider disclosure network efficiently to best reach the growing audience of governance-related communications.
Thanks, Bap. So just a few closing remarks from me, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions if there are any. Firstly, we're always asked which reports we would single out as the best of the best. We can give you a top 3 in no particular order that we would suggest you definitely do take a look at. I think these 3 are particularly great examples. We strongly believe that the concept of value creation in all its various forms will increasingly shape corporate reporting. As sustainability reporting develops and new governance code amendments are made, as technology develops and enables new ways of reporting, and as businesses continue in their quest for public credibility, these factors will all drive reporting forward and an increasing focus on the long-term value created for all stakeholders. There'll always be leaders and there'll always be followers, and we will always continue to push what we believe are the best and most replicable ideas in the hope that our influence will continue to keep UK reporting at the forefront of reporting globally.
First of all, thank you all very much, and especially Bap, who is obviously sort of new to presenting in a big virtual audience. But over the years, so many people have asked me, what is the purpose of an annual report or corporate reporting? And I always give 3 reasons. First of all, it's a document of record that can be compared over previous years, cross-sector, etc. Secondly, it's a management discipline, and this management discipline is becoming more and more important with the increasing amounts of disclosure, both financial and non-financial. But I think with some of the fabulous examples shown today, I personally think that the biggest opportunity in reporting is to really make sure you utilise your verbal and visual assets that are generated with the annual report across all the channels, or as we're calling it, the disclosure network, and the importance of the website in making sure that some of this fabulous information is reappropriated. And again, we've seen some great examples of the use of video now, sort of absolutely sort of embedded into companies' reporting strategy. But Leon, just a couple of questions for you. First of all, I mean, I'm really interested in the whole expanded business model approach. I mean, when the Companies Act first sort of stipulated that companies needed to articulate their business model, I mean, it was absolutely unbelievable. So many clients said, we haven't even got a business model. It's how you make your money and how you relate it to strategy. And so, we really had to help companies sort of articulate business models. But as I say, there used to be this two-page summary essentially, and now they're going embracing a lot more information. So you showed 2 or 3 really good examples, Leon, but how many companies are actually looking at this expanded approach, and what would your advice be in terms of adopting this sort of approach?
So I think there's a few things to think about. One is the fact that most people are not viewing the annual report in the hard copy format, so they're not seeing it as a book. And so when you design something as a spread, you can't be sure that they're viewing it in that way, because you know, they might just be viewing it as single pages. So there's that kind of consideration, but also I think people it became a convention to try and kind of squeeze everything into 2 pages. And there was also a convention around the old octopus value reporting kind of model of sort of inputs and outputs from a capitals perspective. And we also had on top of that these sort of overview sections and at a glance sections of annual reports. And I think really what we're seeing is people trying to present a more coherent story under the banner of the business model title. And to do that, you know, and for the information to be meaningful, it needs to be spread out. So this is a new trend. It's not something that we, you know, it's not all companies are doing it, but we think it's definitely something to share with everybody, to open their eyes to the idea that actually we can try. We don't have to just restrict ourselves to these 2 pages to cover what comes under the heading of business model, and we can include what we think will be decision useful information under that heading in as many pages as it takes. There was one example, I think it was United Utilities, and I think their business model spanned to something like 12 pages or so, or maybe even been 20 pages. It was huge. It covered all sorts of interesting things. So I just think it's an emerging trend, and one that we think is useful. And you're absolutely right. When it all first came out, nobody knew what to put under that heading of business model, and in some cases it was a one-liner. But I think this is a real move in the right direction now.
I've got just one question for Sam as well. I mean, first of all, in terms of the key outputs that from the examples that you gave, I was very interested in how companies showed their materiality matrices, and also you talked a lot about the sort of whole environmental impacts. But one of the big things for me is so two questions really. Evidence giving credibility. Do you have any advice for companies around how they can surface more evidence to give credibility sort of throughout the year before you get into the report? And secondly, I think that you also mentioned that a lot of companies are right at the start of the journey with their TCFD reporting, and you showed Mondi as a really good example. How in terms of companies getting up to the Mondi standard, again, do you have any sort of recommendations on how we can sort of help in sort of driving that progress?
Yeah, definitely. Because Steve, it feels like some kind of exam that you're putting us through at the end of the session. But yeah, I think yeah, I think in terms of the evidence point, when we speak with clients, it's very much having that in the back of your mind in terms of stories and case studies in the back of your mind throughout the year, being mindful that your reporting cycle or the information that you want to be putting out, being aware and collecting those stories as you go through. And also from a practical perspective, I think teams across the business being joined up and communicating, because particularly with environmental and social impact and sustainability reporting, there's activity across the business, across different teams, whether that's people in HR or people within the supply chain function. So the joined up sort of ways of working internally, and just throughout the year taking note of stories, and not sort of leaving it to kicking off the annual report process. In terms of TCFD, so I suppose one great opportunity is to highlight some roundtables we're running, particularly for AIM and small cap companies next week, around implementing TCFD. But before you get to a place such as Mondi, so much work has to go on internally in terms of that scenario analysis. And again, it's about joining up different teams across the business, because ultimately it's centered on analysing those risks and opportunities and the financial impact. And, you know, us at Emperor, in terms of how we can help clients, we're very much focused on that disclosure and that communication, which is the output. But we very much have partners that work with companies internally to help implement the TCFD recommendations before you're at the stage of disclosure.
Thank you, Sam. Well, I think we'll finish there. I mean, my favourite spread in all of the many spreads we showed is the Severn Trent customer and community outcomes. And as Leon said, just bringing the customer sort of more into the reporting story is something which I think a lot of companies that should be considering. Thank you all very much for listening in. Hope you found it useful. Obviously open to any questions, or if you wanted a specific chat with anybody, we'd be delighted to talk to you. And as we said earlier, the video will be published very, very shortly for you to see. Thank you.